Hey, it's Phil, and welcome on the Habit Bootcamps podcast, where I interview entrepreneurs and coaches about their mindset shifts and habits. In this episode, I interview Chris Brown, who is a serial entrepreneur. Now, Chris used to be at a very low point in his life. He was addicted to drugs, he was homeless, had no money in his bank account, and he had to take care of his child. Then he finally started seeing these challenges and obstacles as a way to improve his life and get better. This episode is all about how to deal with failure and obstacles. It's all about persevering, being committed, being dedicated no matter what happens. It's about being resilient, being adaptable, having that growth mindset, and keep on moving forward and learning from whatever happens. So, this is a podcast about the mindset you need to have to be able to deal with whatever happens to you. It's about how to cope and deal with failures and come out stronger. So let me know what you've learned about dealing with obstacles, challenges, and failures by dropping a comment below and enjoy this week's podcast. Today I have Chris Brown on the podcast, an amazing serial entrepreneur. Welcome on the podcast, Chris.
Thanks, man. Thank you. Excited to be here.
If you would have to introduce yourself to somebody who doesn't know you and you wanted to explain what you do, how would you introduce yourself?
Um, Honestly, I always, truthfully, I always struggle with that because it's so hard to define what I do, because there's really no limitations. I don't stick to a particular industry. I just, I like building things, man. I like growing. I like advancing. I like getting better at things, perfecting crafts. But I think that, for the most part, if I had to introduce myself, I'm a serial entrepreneur. You kind of got that right. I'm addicted to startups, man. I think that's probably the best way to explain it. Um, I, my passion, I think, lies in startups. It's that, and that's something that I've kind of recently learned is that, you know, I love that phase. It seems to be the hardest phase. It seems to be when you meet the most resistance, and it seems to be whenever you're forced to grow the most, no matter what it is you're doing. And so I just found that I'm addicted to that, man. So I guess in a nutshell, I'm a serial entrepreneur that's addicted to startups.
Yeah, oftentimes they say that the beginning is the hardest. If we travel back in time and you love building things, what is a significant event in your life that really started molding your personality and your life, you feel?
Man, I think for me, man, in my youth, man, I was a very different person. I kind of grew up and kind of had everything handed to me for the most part. I mean, when I was very young, we weren't very well off, but in my teenage years, my dad, kind of did really well for himself, and I kind of became a spoiled kid. Rules didn't apply to me, and I just kind of went around doing whatever I wanted to do, and I hit a rock bottom when I was about 24. I had a drug addiction. I didn't care about anybody but myself. In fact, I didn't even really know what it meant to care, and probably didn't even care about myself, truthfully. But there came a point during that when I realized that I'm only getting older, and at some point in life, I was going to have to look in a mirror, and I was going to have to face myself, and I was either going to have to be okay with looking at a person who didn't do anything that they wanted to do in life, that didn't accomplish anything, that when you get to that point, it's like you're either going to respect the person that you're looking at, or you're going to regret everything. And I just, man, in that moment, like I really kind of realized, like, I don't want that. I don't want to be 60 years old looking in a mirror thinking, man, I had one shot at life and I didn't take it. You know, I just followed. I went with the wind. I did not. I didn't even have goals, let alone to chase them down and make dreams become a reality. I didn't even have dreams and goals. So I think that was really the start for me. It was in that moment I realized that if I was going to accomplish anything in life, if I wanted to master, this world, I first had to master myself. And I had to kind of discover who I was just to be able to do that with personality and the person that I wanted to become, that I felt like I should be and could be. And I wrote down characteristics. I wrote down different aspects of that personality and how they would handle situations. And truthfully, man, for those few years, when I would come across any sort of decision, big, small, didn't matter, I would stop and take time to think, all right, this is how I would handle it, but how would this other personality handle it? And it's crazy how effective that was too, truthfully. Over time, it just kind of became second nature, and I just kind of became that person. Um, but yeah.
Yeah, a lot of people would say, hey, you had a pretty good foundation that your dad was doing well. So often people say, like, yeah, I'm poor or my circumstances weren't well. Why, in your case, did it actually work against you? Because a lot of people are craving to be pretty well off and have a good foundation and have enough money at home.
Yeah, no, they are. And I think it was handed to me, right? It was there. I had credit cards I didn't have to work for. I had a car that, I mean, don't get me wrong. My dad, when I would get in trouble, my punishment was personal development. He would come, put a stack of books like Robert Kiyosaki's Rich Dad Poor Dad. He'd put a stack of books on my desk and say, you can have your car back whenever you've written a report on each one. So, like, they did the right stuff, but I was a stubborn kid. And, for me, like because it was handed to me, I didn't have any respect, any gratitude for it. Like I didn't understand it, especially with money. I think that's the biggest difference with me now versus then is that I kind of became not just desired and success and set goals, but I kind of became a student of it. And if money defines part of what you call your personal success, then you're gonna have to become a student of that if you want to acquire it and want to be able to manage it. And so, I think that for some people, when you grow up in those situations where your life isn't, so favorable and advantageous, you're kind of forced to deal with those realities at a younger age. And so I think it almost kind of gives you a head start. Don't get me wrong. I'm not trying to say that one situation is better or worse than the other, but it can give you a head start, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So, I mean, I think that, it probably did work against me, but in the end, it everything still turns out the way it should as long as you don't give up, right?
So you mentioned that you finally faced yourself in the mirror and was thinking, hey, this is the person who I'm going to look at the coming years, the coming decade. Was there anything particular that happened at that time that made you face yourself?
Yeah. So again, I'm going to have to go back to kind of give the backstory on that. But when I was, very young, so going all the way back when I was 4 years old, my father died. My mother moved to Nashville to work two jobs to try and provide, right? So I lived with my grandmother, and my grandmother really kind of became my best friend throughout that, and that continued really throughout all of my youth. And when I was about 10 years old. So my grandma had an addiction to pain medication. When I was about 10 years old, I actually began taking these pills with my grandmother. Um, that's horrible, but at the same time, to me, it didn't seem that way. And I know to her, it didn't seem that way. I mean, this continued though throughout my teenage years, and I ended up developing a pretty bad problem with painkillers. It got much worse when my grandmother died. She died of an oxycontin overdose in 2004, and my whole life kind of spiraled out of control for maybe 5 years, and it was towards the end of that. Um, I had about 4 months where I was no longer taking pain pills. I was doing heroin. And, I had gone a decade of taking a prescription drug, which truthfully in the suburbs isn't that uncommon, right?
Mm-hmm.
And I was fully functional. I didn't ever see that there was an issue, right? And that's probably why it continued. Um, 4 months of, this other stuff, man. And my whole life unraveled. My family was disowning me. Just looking at my little sister, my kid, my whole life began to just come apart. And, I realized like, man, I got an option here. I'm at a crossroads, and either I'm going to take control of my life or I'm going to let this, and it wasn't the drug. That's not what the issue was, right? That was a side effect. That was a consequence of it. I was either gonna take control. Or I was gonna let this person that I had become through. Uh, I don't even know what to call it. Just my own self-loathing, I guess. Like it was, it was a moment for me when I realized like this is going to define my life right here. There's going to be a lot more work to do, but either I'm going to take control here and I'm at least going to start taking steps in the right direction, or there's no telling where my life's going to go, but I know I'm not going to like it. So, and that really just kind of sparked the journey for me of trying to just better myself. Right at that time, I honestly had no idea what I wanted to do with my life. Um, I was actually I was in school at the time, and I was a pre-med student at a college here in Texas. The goal was to go to med school. Ended up dropping out, which truthfully I'm grateful I did in the end. Um, but at the time, not so much. But yeah, man, I mean, that really sparked the journey. And it was really just, that was my rock bottom. I realized that I was about as low on the totem pole, I guess you could say, as I was willing to be. Like I did not view myself as having any value at that time, but I was at least smart enough to know that it wasn't that I didn't have value. It's just that I wasn't bringing the value out of myself.
Or maybe you were stubborn enough.
Yeah, maybe that's what it was. Yeah. So I, I knew that I could do better. And I knew that the only way that was going to happen is if I decided to do that. And yeah, I mean, that's really what sparked it. So kind of a long answer, but
You can ask the question, I know I can do better, but that's the first step. But then often people think, yeah, what can I do better? What should I focus on? How did you decide what to focus on or try something new?
so, in the beginning, like I said, it was a matter of, I knew that before I could do anything as far as mastering any crafts or mastering the world around me, right? I knew I had to first become a master of myself. So truthfully, I did a lot of meditation, a lot of reading, a lot of personal development, just a lot of, introspective thinking and really analyzing myself. There was actually I spent about 2 weeks, and this is during the time whenever I was kind of building this personality prototype that I wanted to become. And I spent about 2 weeks on paper mapping out my personality, my traits, my character defects, um, and maybe some character assets, right? Um, and I started to kind of list those out on paper. And there were some that I liked, some that I didn't like, and a lot of times one would lead to another that would lead to another. And so it really kind of allowed me to kind of see, right? So anyways, I did these things. I did a whole bunch of crazy other stuff, but that's not the point I'm trying to get at, right? I did these things, and it really helped me kind of find bearings and figure out where a true north was, at least in the sense of bettering myself so that I could become the type of person that was capable of taking the next steps. Because at that time, the only right step for me was just figuring out how to, have some level of value.
You say some other crazy stuff, but I'm often interested in crazy stuff. I, for instance, took like mushrooms in a sensory deprivation tank, and I got a lot of insights that way.
Yeah.
Did you also have some introspective experiences, maybe with some psychedelics or other things, or things that happened in a dream? Or
So, what's funny too is kind of. So at one point, right? I did LSD one point about this was towards the end of that journey, and I was actually, or the end of that introspective journey, I was actually starting the beginning of my journey as an entrepreneur. And it's funny because I had obviously done this plenty of times in my life prior to, but this is the one time I really gained some insight, and the insight is very simple and almost silly, right? So I did this, and I mean, it was an amazing time. Don't get me wrong. But the only message that kept sticking with me is not now. Now's not the time. And it was almost like, I don't even know how to explain just how profound it was for me. I mean, you understand, you've done psychedelics. You understand how sometimes those things can just be so profound. For me, it was just a matter of like, I liked this was fun, but now is not the time. And that kind of became a theme for me, moving forward throughout the past 6 years, truthfully. Um, I stopped drinking. I stopped doing, I mean, literally everything that, other than working and spending time with my family and exercising and doing the things that are good for me. Uh, for the most part, I stopped doing everything. And it was it was an easy decision. You know, my dad used to tell me whenever I was younger, when you know what you want out of life and you know where you want to go, life becomes very simple because every other decision is already made for you. Every time you come to a crossroad, becomes a decision, you just ask yourself the question, does this further me along the path I'm trying to go, or does it not? And if it, you make your decisions accordingly. So it's pretty simple. Um, so I mean, it's crazy, but I think that kind of set the tone because after that was when I truly became serious about my entrepreneurial journey, and I have built several companies that have all fallen apart and failed. Um, some with some success mixed in, right? But none of that's ever mattered for me. You know what I mean? Because for me, I knew I didn't go to school for this. You can't really go to school for this, right? And even if you do, they can't teach you what you're really going to face. Uh, I knew that I wasn't truly going to be prepared for what I was going to face. So I knew going into everything that this was going to be trial by fire, and that I was going to fail a lot. I was going to fall on my face a lot. And so I think that helped me because when it happened, it wasn't an issue. Um,
Yeah, maybe because you failed, excuse my French, so much then when you were at a low point that these failures are like, I was that low once, it can only get better, and I'm better than that situation, so I can also get better than this situation.
Exactly. And I mean, I think that after you go through so much in life, um, I think that honestly, it's not that it gets easier, it's that you get better, right? I think somewhere in there there's a quote from Jim Rohn, but it's not that it gets easier, it's that you get better at dealing with it. And I think the more you go through things, the less they shock you, the less they leave question marks with you of, will I get through this? Because you've already overcome so many other things that, like, for a fact, you always come out on the other side intact.
Yeah, I feel a lot of people want to improve circumstances, but if you learn how to navigate circumstances, you got a skill that whatever happens, you can learn something from it and make your circumstances better. But in the beginning, it's learning how to navigate, deal with them, reflect about them, and take the next positive action that maybe optimizes your life or business and creates more clarity.
Yeah. Yeah. Honestly, I've kind of developed a process, truthfully. So I'm notorious for this, and anybody that works with me will tell you this. When I had my first business, it was funny because I would tell people every week that we were shutting it down, we were done, we were closing the doors, and I'd be fine in 15 minutes, right? But I realized at some point that this was just part of my process, and when I fail, and when I make mistakes, or when I run into roadblocks that I know I'm at fault for, I kind of, I guess, accidentally discovered this process just by doing it over and over again. But for the most part, when I make a mistake or I have some sort of failure, I grieve, right? I take 5, 10, 15 minutes to kind of to be pissed off, to cuss, to say fuck this, whatever, I'm fucking done. I say shit that I certainly don't mean. And I do that by myself, right? I walk outside, I deal with it, I grieve for a minute, then I stop. I take a moment to assess the situation, right? Figure out what the actual damage is, figure out what I can, how it can be bettered. And then I take action, right? So it works for me. Probably doesn't work for everybody. I've seen some people who are much better at dealing with the stress and with the failures, but for me, that's part of my process. And it allows me to turn around and attack things pretty quickly without really having too much of a hiccup, right? So our whole world could be burning around us and we're still moving forward as long as I have 5 minutes to step outside and scream.
I feel personally as an entrepreneur, again, related to what we talked about in the beginning, that the beginning is often the hardest. Why? People often say resistance is holding me back. But I feel in my perception, oftentimes clarity is holding people back the most. But when they start executing things and seeing if it works or not and maybe fail, they get more clarity. But a lot of people want clarity from the beginning, but in the beginning it's very hard to be clear because your path is still so wide open.
Yeah, no, it is. It just reminded me of something. Let's see if I can remember it here. Belief. So there's I have a mentor of mine who taught me this a long time ago. And you're right. People, they want to have clarity. They want to be able to see the finish line at the beginning, and it's just not how it works, right? Like whenever I started my journey, I had no idea of where I would go. I didn't know what industry I'd be in. I didn't know what business would be a success. I didn't know what I was going to do in my life. But um, this mentor of mine, he taught me this. It's called the bear cycle, and you've probably heard of it. But um, first you have to have belief. You have to have belief in what you're doing and belief that it's possible, right? And I think most people where they struggle and where they fail from the beginning is that even if they believe something's possible, they don't believe it's possible for them, right? They don't believe and they don't see themselves being able to be the person that achieves those results. But you have to have the belief first. It just doesn't work any other way. If you go into something and you don't believe, it's not going to work, period. You're never going to be there. After belief, you have enthusiasm. You have to have enthusiasm. You have to keep enthusiasm, right? Winston Churchill is actually my favorite quote. He said, the key to success is being able to move from failure to failure without any loss of enthusiasm. And I think that quote is really defined truthfully kind of who I am, right? But then you have to take action, right? So you have to have the belief, you have to have the enthusiasm, then you have to take action, and really you have to take repeated, consistent, uh, determined action over and over and over again, no matter what you face. Then you have results. And I think what people also don't realize is that some of these things you can have the belief and the enthusiasm and then take action. You can do that in a week. It may take you 6 years to see results, though. I think you kind of have to. People just have to understand that and expect that going into really anything, man. If you're doing something that you feel is out of the norm, most people wouldn't do it, or it's difficult, it's a challenge, then you got to expect to have the delayed result, the delayed gratification. You got to expect for uh, I feel like you got to expect for the world to fall apart for you to get there. Um, One thing I found to be true is that before every breakthrough in life, there's always a breakdown. And I've heard this from pretty much every successful entrepreneur that I've ever read or listened to or spoken to. They all say the same thing. I almost feel like it's the universe or God or whatever you believe's way of testing you at that last moment and saying, all right, look, you've done all of this, you're here, but are you really ready for it? Do you really, really want it? You know what I mean? So I feel like people just have to expect it. They have to prepare themselves for that. They have to know that that's you're going to face it. It's going to happen. You're not going to reach what your definition of success is. Whatever success is for you, you're not going to get there without dealing with roadblocks and failures and truthfully having times where you feel like the world is against you, where no matter what you do, it all falls apart. And it's in those moments when you're knocking on the door and you're 5 steps away from being at least at the next level. So
Yeah, oftentimes it's a blessing in disguise. They should have, it's a bit aligned with Tao Te Ching and the natural way or whatever. They should have like some kind of Asian term for it, which means I'm going for something, I'm fully committed, I'm fully enthusiastic, but I'm not so dependent on it that I won't adapt along the way. When something comes my way, I know how to navigate it. And that's sort of the mindset, to be determined, go for something, but not be so attached to the results, but still not give up too quickly and adapt along the way. That is a bit the mindset what we're looking for as an entrepreneur, I feel.
yeah, no, I agree as well. I think adaptability is key. Like you have to be able to adapt because look, whenever I started, I was in the entertainment industry. I'm now in the medical industry dealing with doctors every day. And, I also do some other stuff, but that's kind of my main focus. And like, there were many stops in different industries along the way there. and most of them were unrelated to where I am now. And at that time, I knew that I just had to keep adapting, man. When things came my way, hey, this is an opportunity. I'm going to seize it. And I just kind of followed the yellow brick road, if you will. And yeah, I think that's right, man. And I think that most entrepreneurs, I think that where they find success and why they find success that other people don't is because they have this unique ability to put their head down and continue working and not really worry about the results, right? It's just about, am I moving forward every day? Did I take a step in the right direction today, right? And that's it. Like, and I feel like, and I don't know this, but I know in my case it's the truth. But I feel like for most people it probably is too, that whenever you finally get there and you start acquiring the success, you almost don't even realize it. I didn't know for, when our income had finally exceeded what our goals were, or at least what some of our shorter term goals were, right? I didn't even know it had happened. I didn't realize it had happened. And you almost don't even realize life is getting better because you're so focused on your end goals, right? Um, but and I think that's the difference. I think most people when they're putting in the work, they're only focused on the results. That's it. They're focused on the results, and they're not seeing it doesn't develop all at once, right? It develops in phases and in levels, and you get your results in levels. Everything starts to change in different levels.
Which is falling in love with the process, which is something beautiful, I think, because then you can really enjoy the process. Because the older you get and the more goals and results you have, the more those goals and results seem very short-lived, and you've been building it up all the time, and then you realize that mindset, that growth, that handling circumstances, especially for entrepreneurs or people who are into self-development, that's like, well, I learned something new and we can keep growing.
Yeah, yeah, no, absolutely. Yeah, I love that you said that too. Falling in love with the process. It's mandatory because if you don't fall in love with what it is to be an entrepreneur, if you don't fall in love with what it is to be resilient, to be reluctant or not reluctant, but uh, relentless. Sorry, resilient, relentless, committed, dedicated. Just having a don't quit attitude, and then at the same time, like while all these things are flying at you, it makes you feel good because you're able to deal with them. All right, you're able to like. I feel like an entrepreneur and that journey is you're riding a bike um, through the park, right? But the bike is on fire and you're on fire, and everyone in the park is throwing fire at you, and everyone's mocking you and telling you that you're crazy. What you want to do is never going to be a reality for you. You're not capable of that. You should just get a job like everybody else, right? You deal with all of these things, but um, it, you kind of fall in love with it because you know while you're going through it that in the end it's just going to make it that much sweeter, right? So I know for me, like there came a point where I realized our life was we were fighting so hard for what we wanted, and things were just getting worse and worse and worse.
You were living on the street once, I think, when you were having a child or almost having a child.
Yeah, we actually I had a nightclub in Dallas, and after our nightclub, we were doing all right for ourselves. We had a plan. Our daughter was due in September, and all that plan kind of came crashing down. My daughter was born 3 months early on July 4th. My business partner at the time decided that he didn't like the partnership, stole the last of my money, and put me in debt with a lot of people for everything that we were doing. Anyway, so within a couple of weeks, man, we were homeless. I lost my Cadillac. We had nothing. I had no income. I had nothing, and I hadn't had a job in so long. Right? I've been doing my own thing for so long that I didn't. I struggled to pull it together in time. So we ended up having my daughter was in the NICU for 105 days. We ended up living there with her. They actually gave my fiance 3 meals a day because she was a breastfeeding mother. We shared those 3 meals a day. Ended up someone was actually generous enough to loan us the money to buy a cash car at that time. So we had a car at least. Um, we ended up moving from each of our family's houses after my daughter was born. and after she came home from the hospital. And because we were on this journey, right? And that was, for me, that was the moment when everything really changed. When my daughter was born and I lost everything, I realized nothing is guaranteed, nothing is for sure. So the only way to make sure that you're safe and secure is to have more than enough, right? So now I've got 6 different streams of income. And if one of them goes away, I don't have to panic, right? Whereas before, if one of them went away, it was everything I had. And so during that time, though, both of our families, one after another, kind of disowned us for a little while. We ended up moving in with a friend of mine, and after a while, got kicked out of there. And we slept in the car. We had nights where we were just moving kind of back and forth. And my daughter at this time, she's got a G button, a tube in her stomach, so we can feed her with a feeding pump. It was a mess, right? And so for us, like, I think that was kind of when we were like, you know what, this stuff sucks, but what kind of story would it be without this? You know what I mean? Like, wouldn't have much of a story to share if it wasn't like this. And I knew in my heart, and I believed with every ounce of me, that as long as I didn't quit, I would eventually find myself where I wanted to be. And I almost, again, I feel like people get so caught up with a plan, right? I think you need a plan, but I also think you just got to have balls. I think you just got to go. You just have to take action, man. That's it. You just have to keep taking action. You got to have an idea of which direction you want to head, right? You got to find your true north, but there's no map. There's no specific route to take. You just got to keep taking action. And when things throw you off your path, you find your true north and you take off again. So, yeah, I mean, it did. It got bad for us for a while, and we, even after that, whenever we finally got an apartment, we made a mistake and went somewhere where we could afford. I guess it wasn't a mistake, but it was where we could afford, and it happened to be in the hood. I mean, there were gunshots every single night. Our first week there were 2 people murdered 3 doors down. So that was terrifying with my daughter there. And so that really kind of sparked this relentlessness within me of, my daughter is not going to grow up and have a mediocre life. Like, I'm just not okay with that. Not whenever I have the ability to change it. So, yeah.
Yeah, that reminds me, like, sometimes when one thing happens in a day, you're fucking frustrated and you're really annoyed. When a second bad thing happens, really annoyed. And then the third thing, oh, it's going to be a day like this. Okay, better it just be all at once, so I know how to deal with it, so I can climb up again,
Yeah. You know what's funny is, truthfully, that happened to me this morning, actually. I've had an interesting morning, to say the least. And I was very frustrated, maybe 30 minutes before actually jumping on this. But I realized in that time, I took my time to reflect while I was in the car. And, it was because they came one after another, though. If everything had happened at once, I'd be like, all right, shit, we got a shitstorm, but let's deal with it. But it was because one thing came, I took my time to deal with it, and another thing came, and I'm like, it's not even 10 o'clock yet. I'm just dealing with all this. But I was listening to an interview with Rob Deerdeck. I don't know if you know who that is, the guy from DC Skateboards. He did that show on MTV, Robin Big and Fantasyland or something like that. I don't know what it's called. Anyways, so every morning he basically, he has on a whiteboard. Every morning he rates how motivated he is, right? From a 1 to a 10, and he found that over time, right, after doing that for a while, I mean, you have to be honest with it, and I've actually been doing this now. So in the beginning, when things happen, you're kind of below a 5 sometimes, right? You got bad stuff happening, but over time it becomes to where your base is kind of a 5. And I think that whenever you do that, and I mean, even without that, right, you find ways to be grateful for all the positive things that are happening in your life. And eventually, it's not that you have more positive things in your life, it's that you're seeing them more clearly, I think, right? There are a lot of things in my life that I wasn't grateful for before, because they didn't seem like they were that positive. But I am now, because I can see clearly that they are great things in my life, right? Even so, I guess where I'm trying to go with this, right, is that um, when you have so many positive things in your life, the negative things, they don't have much of an effect, right? So in the past, when my daily motivation might have been a 2 whenever I woke up, something like that happened, it would ruin my entire day, sometimes 2 or 3 days. Now it happens, and it might mess me up for 20 minutes, right? But that's typically going to be about it. Um,
It's also
but
about being conscious about paying attention to what you're grateful for, because one of the pitfalls that I sometimes have is when you're so addicted to growth, like a lot of entrepreneurs and people in the personal development community, your base level of what you expect keeps on rising, and we keep on looking at the future. But if we sometimes look back to the past and see like all those incremental things that we could be grateful for and that we could be happy for, that we're taking for granted right now, and just see like, whoa, I would be so happy when I achieved this like 5 years ago, but I'm not paying attention to it anymore. It also is a bit of a mindset to pay attention to it, because we can be so
yeah,
focused on growth that we forget the things that we could be grateful for and that we take for granted.
yeah, no, I agree. And again, that's kind of what I was saying. We kind of just went through over the past month, was like, stopping and reflecting, and thinking, oh wow, our life has actually changed a lot. It's very different from where it was, even just a couple of months ago, and then of course from years ago. Um, and so yeah, it is, man. You have to stop and look back at it. And I think that definitely as entrepreneurs, we tend to not do that, because we're focused on not just the future, but the what we have to do that day. You know what I mean? Like, you're so
Mm-hmm.
focused on the next goal and on the next task, that thinking about the task from 3 months ago, or an achievement from months ago, they just kind of, your achievements don't get as much credit, I think, at least not from yourself, right?
Yeah,
And
the
it's
mindset I sometimes has was like, when something bad happens, like it's almost like you have a finite level of bad luck and you have a finite level of good luck. And when you really exhausted the bad luck, there's a lot bigger chance that you will have some good luck next.
I firmly believe that. For the longest time, man, I had the worst luck. And I'm telling you, if it could go wrong, it would go wrong, right? If Even if it was against all odds for it to go wrong, it was going to go wrong if I was involved. Um, and I remember whenever that started to change, and that actually was about a year ago. Whenever that really started to change, and it was wild, because even my fiance and my friends and business partners that I work with, all kind of noticed just the small subtle changes, and they would be such little things, right? But I would stop and think, man, a year ago this would not have gone this way. This is just not how it would have worked out for me. And I think, truthfully, I think you're right. One, it's just kind of the natural balance of things. You have bad, you have the negative weigh in, and eventually the positive is going to weigh in as well. I think most people just don't stick around long enough to see the positive. Um, but also, I think it's that you attract what you become, and through all of the negative stuff and all of the dark times, if you're really serious about becoming successful and about just leading a fulfilling life, you have to find a way to have an inner light, right? You have to find a way to be happy and positive and content, no matter what your external environment is. The world can be burning, crashing down, bombs dropping. You have to be happy somehow, so that you can continue to move forward. And I think that through that, you kind of become more of a positive force in your own life, right? And I think that you begin to attract the better stuff to you.
Yeah, you already mentioned the word fire 3 times, and I also am very much aligned with fire, because you can burn yourself by fire, you can scorch things, you can enlighten things, you can, show the path, whatever. It can be something transformative, but you want to use the fire in a contained, good way to enlighten yourself and not burn the world, or be burned.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I used to always say that um, you can tell somebody. So I think it's important to understand the fire, right? You have to. kind of become a master of it, because you're right. You can be burned by it. You can torch the world around you. You can torch your family, your friends, everything that you've built. Um, or it can be something that is a weapon for you, right? It can be what burns inside you to push you forward. It can be what lights the path. And it can also be the lessons that you learn, I think. You know, I've never been the type where you could tell me, or at least in my youth, where you could tell me the fire is hot and I shouldn't touch it. That doesn't do anything for me, right? I mean, I believe you, I hear you, but I have knowledge of this now, but I have no wisdom of this. I have
Mm.
not touched that fire. And you better believe I'm going to touch that fire at some point. And so, um, but you know, I think you kind of learn to have a respect for, I mean, talking about fire almost in a physical form here, but you kind of learn to have a respect for that. Like, that fire is what keeps you going. That fire inside is what pushes you. It's what ends up defining who you become. Um,
Yeah,
so
and
yeah, I
also
mean,
that fire can be the thing that is the spark of your journey and ignites desire and passion. But it can also be the same thing. What often happens with entrepreneurs, a burnout. They just fade away because you're just putting too much energy and just neglecting fundamental things in their life, and they keep on pushing.
yep. No, I agree. You know, I actually recently read an article. It was titled "Disconnect to Reconnect," right? And I actually took its advice and did this. So over the holiday, I took 5 weeks, maybe 4 or 5 weeks, much longer than I wanted to really just kind of relax and not really. I mean, really, I didn't do anything. And typically, I'm against this. I think that when other people are doing this, you should be on the grind. When other
Mhm.
people are sitting back, you should be grinding and hustling. Um, what I did, I kind of needed a break. I had been going and going and going from one venture to the next, from one task to the next, just for years now, where I needed a little bit of a break, and I had a little bit of a break a couple years ago because my journey, um, it tore my family apart at one point, and this is what I mean by the fire comes, and you just have to be you have to be ready to deal with it. I knew that for me when it happened, and me and my fiance separated, I knew that my my path and my destination ended with them in my life, and I knew that. And so it tore me up, but at the same time it motivated me and fueled me to keep pushing for what I wanted, right? um, and I think that, you know, people just really have to be prepared for everything that can come their way, and you have to, sometimes you have to take a break, right? Sometimes you do right now.
Yeah, no, sometimes you just want to sit around the campfire and just enjoy, and just make it cozy and warm. I mean, I love hustle. I love being productive. I love really using my time efficiently. But there's a paradox with the comfort zone. Comfort zone means leaving familiar terrain, and that's the beginning of the hero's journey. But when your
Hmm.
comfort zone is the hustle zone, that's your comfort zone now, just sitting down and relaxing, that is going outside of your comfort zone, which is very uncomfortable for a lot of entrepreneurs. And they think they're still going outside their comfort zone. No, no, no,
Yeah,
no. Your hustle zone is your new comfort zone. And sometimes you should also nourish other aspects, which maybe is just doing nothing and relaxing, which sounds paradoxical, but it can be great for creativity and productivity.
I completely agree with that, though. Definitely that. There, it's not the norm anymore. Sitting back not doing anything isn't the norm. You know what I mean? It was really hard for me to take that break for 5 weeks or so. But where I was trying to go with that before I kind of went off on that tangent was, um, that was good for me. That helped me because when I got done with that, I was so ready to go and so motivated, man. So um, I think I was 10 times more productive in the following 2 weeks after that than I was probably the 6 months leading up to it. Um, and just because I needed it at that time. I needed time to reflect, and it actually gave me time to reflect and be grateful for everything that we had achieved and had overcome. It allowed us to kind of see, hey, we have progressed a lot. We have made it, pretty far along this path that we've been trekking down. So
Also, some of the things that I noticed with entrepreneurs is either they don't get started and they don't go deep enough to cultivate a certain skill. But on the other hand, you also have people who keep on putting effort and energy into something that is a little bit working, but is not the best use of their time, their energy, and attention. But since they put so much time and effort in it, they're not willing to cut it off.
Yeah, I mean, I think at some point you have to just, you got to know when to cut your losses. You got to know when. It's hard too, because I feel like a lot of times people cop out, right? They meet resistance and they struggle, and so they tell themselves, oh, this is just a sign that I shouldn't be going down this path. When in all actuality, it's probably a sign saying you should. But sometimes things, it's not maybe that they're gone beyond the point of repair, but it's just the fact that it's not worth it to repair it, right? It makes more sense to go ahead and move on to the next productive thing you can be doing.
I think
So,
it's useful to go into something to see long enough if it works or not. But I think also after a while, you should reflect and see, is this really the best use of my time and focus? And if it's not, even though you went and did it for like a couple of weeks or months,
hmm
maybe you should stop it. It's not that it wasn't for nothing. You got some feedback about what works, what doesn't work. Maybe you cultivated some skills, but yeah, you want to have a good return on investment, whatever investment means, energy, fulfillment,
yeah,
money.
truthfully, in the past, just in the past couple of years, I've ended up walking away from several really big opportunities that I had already taken and become involved in and dedicated a fair amount of time to. But there came a point where I realized that either the people I was working with, or the company, the product, the service, or whatever it was we were doing, it just didn't align with my pace, or where I wanted to be, where I wanted to go. And I was already committed and devoted, and even had to give up income in some of these situations. But I knew that it was hindering me. It wasn't right for me, and it wasn't right for me at that time. And I mean, that was a hard decision, but you got to be able to make that decision. You have to. And I think that people have to, you got to be defensive of your goals and your dreams. You have to be willing to fight for them. And sometimes that means it's hard, because a lot of times we don't realize that, you know, other positive things can take away from it too. You can have other great opportunities that are in front of you, but sometimes you can't do them all. Most entrepreneurs feel like they can, right? And we try, but sometimes you just can't take them all. And you have to be ready and willing to make that decision, and to execute and stick with what it is that you got to follow your passion.
What do you think are some misconceptions about entrepreneurship and being an entrepreneur?
I would say that we're crazy, but no, that's probably true. Um, Misconceptions. Truthfully, I think there's a lot of people out there that think entrepreneurs are just lazy, right? um, and I think that I don't think that's the case. I think it's just we like to live life on our terms. There were years where I wasn't making great money, but I owned every minute of my time. And even though we made just enough money to get by, we knew what the future looked like. You know what I mean? And so, misconceptions. It's hard because I know people don't think it's easy, right? That's why most people won't do it. Most of them think that we're crazy, and again, we are. So there's, I think that, man, I think that, a lot of people think that it's just kind of a cop out. We're lazy. We just don't want to go work a 9 to 5. We don't want to do these things. But the truth is, it's not that. And another thing, actually, I think that a lot of people think it's fueled by greed, right? They think that this journey is fueled by greed. They think that we desire to have all the money in the world for these greedy reasons, and all that it's all, we're devils, whatever, right? But the truth of the matter is, um, Grant Cardone actually says you're greedy if you're okay with being broke, right? That's selfish. If you're okay with being broke, that's the most selfish you could be, because you have nothing to offer and to give that. I mean, don't get me wrong, you not nothing. There are things you can offer and give back. But with money comes power and comes the ability to make change and to really improve situations.
Now, I'm big into habits. Are there any kind of habits, rituals, routines that you do consistently that you really like to do to have an okay or a good day?
Yeah, I mean, I think you got to reflect, right? One, I think you need to have a process, a routine, just kind of way you do things from when you wake up to. So I think for me, personal development is big. I listen to a lot of audio. Um, those are, I think that's important, man. I think you have to. Your mind is like a computer, and you got to put positive stuff in there if you want positive stuff to come out, right? If you want to be productive and accomplish things, you've got to be fueling yourself with the right stuff. So um, I think that it's important to take care of your health, mental and physical. You got to eat right. You got to, you know, you got to give yourself the right fuel. You need to exercise, and you got to take care of this, man. You have to. And so I think for me, the habits are definitely, the exercise, the which I need to do more of, truthfully. But the exercise, the reading, the development of myself, and yeah, I mean, I think for everybody, things are different too, but I think those things are consistent. Not I think, I know those things are consistent with everyone. They need to be, right? You need to be doing those things. So.
Before I delve into the concluding questions, is there anything else you still would like to share that we haven't talked about in this podcast?
I guess just in the terms of talking to entrepreneurs, right? Speaking to
Mhm.
them, like I think that the key to success is developing a don't quit attitude, right? You can't quit. You can't give up. Um, don't worry about the results. Don't worry about uh, what it looks like during the process. That's not important. It doesn't matter, right? What's important is that every day you get up and you take steps in the right direction. You have to identify what the direction is, right? But you wake up and you take steps. You keep your head down. When disaster strikes, you have to know and believe in your heart that you're going to come out on the other side intact, right? That's none of that defines you, right? None of the stuff that happens to you defines you. It's how you deal with it that defines you. So, um, you just have to, I guess, for lack of a better term, you have to become a savage in how you deal with life, right? And you have to believe that about yourself. You have to believe that you are capable of being the best at everything you do, and you take everything you do serious. If it's mowing the yard, doing the dishes, right, building a business, speaking in public, you got to have the desire to be the best at it every single time you do it. You know what I mean? And I think that if people develop that mindset, you kind of become unstoppable, right? Because the only thing that keeps people from being successful in life is themselves and the stories they tell themselves about why it's not possible or why it's not possible for them. But if those go away and you believe of what you're capable of, and not just believe but know in your heart that not only are you capable of it, but it's happening, right? It's happening. You're not going to quit until it does. Um, Man, I just don't think there's anything that can stop somebody when they're there. You know what I mean? When they've got to that level.
What do you think are some good resources for people if they want to learn how to develop that mindset, or they want to read some good books about entrepreneurship or startups?
Yeah, I would say so. For me, the book that changed my life, truthfully, was Gary Vaynerchuk's his first book, Crush It. Um, I think it may not have been his first book, but it was the first Crush It book that he did. That book absolutely changed my life. Um, Anything by John C. Maxwell. All of his books are absolutely amazing. Expert in leadership, and developing other leaders. So if you want to build a business and you want to build something, big, you need to develop leaders. So John C. Maxwell, definitely. Richest Man in Babylon. That's an amazing book, and that I think is necessary for anybody who desires wealth, because it'll give you a very firm understanding of money and how it operates and how it functions and how to use that to your advantage, right? Um, so there's also a book by Napoleon Hill. Um, yeah, everybody's familiar with some of his books, but he did one called Outwitting the Devil.
Hmm.
And have you seen or read or listened to that?
I read Think and Grow Rich. It's my top in on my top five, but I haven't
Yeah,
read
no,
that one.
absolutely. It's I mean, and it should be. Every entrepreneur should read it 5 times, right? But Outwitting the Devil, I think, is equally as good and equally as important to read. Um, it Reading that book will help you develop that mindset more than anything because it kind of teaches you to fortify yourself against the negative forces out there
Mm.
and to fortify yourself from the negative forces within here, right? Um, so, I mean, it's an amazing book. But I mean, it's anything by any of those authors. There are so many others, right? I could sit here and list books for days. But there's a book I have by a guy named I think it's Shane Snow. I'm not certain of the name, but the book is called Smart Cuts. Um, Amazing book. Um, so it's definitely worth checking out as well. But
What would you like people to say at your funeral about you?
oh man, you know, I think that I would like people going back to whenever I kind of designed that personality for myself, right? That prototype of what I wanted to become. I think that for me, one of the biggest things that was on that list and that I feel like I have kind of incorporated into life and that I want to continue to do so, and I hope it goes noticed is um, the fact that I actually do care, right? And I don't just want my success. I want everybody around me to be successful. Um, and I think that kind of defines success is by helping other people become, find their own success. But so I think I would like to hear. I mean, people say that he actually cared, and um, I guess also that uh, against all odds, you know, I made the impossible possible. That's a tough question. You don't usually think about that because you're not really going to be around for that one.
Yeah, it's memento mori. The last question. If I talk about a meaningful and fulfilling life, what is a meaningful and fulfilling life for you?
Just living life on your terms. For me, living life on my terms without restrictions. I don't care about money necessarily. I just hate having restrictions in life. I don't want my daughter to ask me to do something and I can't do it for her because I don't have the money. Um, I think that if that were the reality for her, then I've got some fault there, right? Because I have the ability to change that. And so for me, I think it's not about the money. It's not about a number. Um, I don't care about how much money I ever make. I just care that I'm able to live life on my terms without any restrictions to me and my family. Um, and and that's it, man. Owning my time. You know what I mean? Being able to spend my time with the people that I care about and I love, and doing what I want to do when I want to do it, how I want to do it.
I want to take a second to appreciate you for showing people that they can live on their terms, that if they're like adaptable and resilient, they can really go for what they want. It maybe might not be the easy path, but the beginning is the hardest path, and you can actually become a self-made man or a self-made woman. If people want to find out more about what you do, how can they find out more about you and get in touch with you?
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, I'm on Facebook, just Chris Brown. Um, I You can if you want to find out more about what I do, you can visit my website. It's www.lenusconsultants lenus consultants.com. Um, I mean, and you can reach out to me on Facebook. Um, you know, I'm always there. I have people message me all the time, just wanting to talk about whatever they're going through or have questions about their business or whatever. Um, I love dealing with new people. I love talking to new people. So, yeah, please feel free. So,
Thanks for being an inspiring guest on the podcast, Chris. Wish you all the best.
Hey, thanks, man. I really appreciate it.
Hey, it's Phil from Habit Bootcamps, and I help entrepreneurs and coaches achieve more in less time by boosting their productivity and sales. If you would also like to get on a free consultation call with me, you should go to habitbootcamps.com/getproductive or habitbootcamps.com/getsales. And if you like my podcast, don't forget to subscribe and check out my Habit Bootcamps Facebook group and YouTube channel for some more awesome content.